Right.
Yes, it's working. Now gone.
We got any response? Is it audio working?
We'll have to wait for people to come in and give us feedback.
Okay.
Yo, if anyone's listening now, let me know if you can hear us. Good, man. I don't think no one's in yet still.
Okay.
Let me see what's going on. Yeah. Yo, let me know if you can hear us now. A couple people are in.
Huh? Well, I'll turn mine on and see if it works.
I think we're good still. Man, like Mighty Dread, don't know my brother, big up.
Seems to be on. Can you hear us all right?
Good sound. Peace to Janice Seeker. Yeah. We're good now still.
That's what we want to see.
All right. Take it away then again, Haikun. Let's go from the top.
Okay. So, first of all, a little bit of simple overview and background. There has been a long-standing conflict between the system that exists in China based on public ownership and Communist Party power and the bureaucratic apparatus of power, and the United States of America based on private ownership and, in inverted commas, free markets for control over the world. And the Americans wanted to use, or better said, there was a trade war between America and China under the whole period of Trump. And there were factions within the American influential strata, particularly around our friend Steve Bannon, who wanted to use the coronavirus crisis in China as a mechanism to instigate a rebellion in China based on the type of Hong Kong model. So you would have the collapse of the healthcare system in Wuhan, the loss of authority of the government in Wuhan and China as a whole, particularly around the issue of the death of the elderly. It's a very, very, very emotive place. It is here, but it's even more emotive in China. And people like Bannon, on the 24th of February, for example, he on his broadcast by something called Zooming In, he prophesied 5 or 6 million dead in China. The government would not be able to deal with the crisis. They wouldn't have the health service staff. The system would collapse. The Americans he demanded that the American healthcare experts be accepted into China, that the firewall against free information be broken down, and China open up to the world to allow the West to save China from catastrophe. So this was what the line was from Steve Bannon and the right wing, who, don't forget, this guy was one of the most influential figures. He was the campaign organizer and the former chief of staff of Donald Trump. So this is not nobody. Now, for something like 30 days now, he's been running a...
How did he even get into those positions in the first place? What's he do in general, like behind that?
He's a wealthy businessman who's tried to become the most influential right-wing political figure, organizing the new right around the world, everyone from Tommy Robinson to Bolsonaro to, you know, Donald Trump. He sees him as sort of Dominic Cummings of the world. Yeah, it's that type of mindset he's got. Now, the problem is their idea failed, and the Chinese, by carrying out a lockdown. Now, there's nothing unusual about a lockdown in that sense against epidemiological diseases like viruses and this type of thing. In Chinese history, there's a book I've got here. It's called Science and Civilization in China, and it was written by Where is it? I'll find it there later on. Written by Joseph Needham, and there's one book. It's an encyclopedia about the history of China and Chinese culture. And one section's on medicine, and it was always the case. I mean, that they used in a period of epidemics, they used lockdowns and isolation and quarantine as the mechanism containing. And it's perfectly true that that is the only means by which you can contain a virus or an illness which you have no immunity to, or which you have no vaccine for, no protection from. And so this was also used in the Middle Ages in Europe. You know, but this has been used for a long, long time in China. And so they applied this method backed by the power of the networks into the community that the state has. And that basically is like in the 1970s, if you lived in a council estate in London, you had caretakers, you had staff who were connected with like repairs and all the rest of it. And so it's that type of network on a larger scale that actually has been able to ensure that people, you know, abided by the quarantine regulations, which succeeded because we know the incubation period for COVID virus, the COVID-19 virus, is about 2 weeks. And generally people become symptomatic within a week. And therefore, if people are at home or not intermingling at the scale that they normally do, then you can contain the virus. And as long as you do sufficient testing that verifies that you have the virus or have had the virus, ideally, then you can control the spread of the disease, partly by also contact tracing. So testing, contact tracing, quarantine, these are mechanisms by which you can overcome the virus. And
when you say all of these initiatives are aimed at protecting the most vulnerable, because in essence, what it seems to be the case is that most people who get it will just go through symptoms, and then eventually their body will develop the ability to combat it, and they won't catch it again. So it's not as bad as this is what I'm hearing. It's not as bad as just having a common cold or something like that.
Well, that's not quite true. I mean, 80% of the population have mild illness, and estimates vary, perhaps 20, perhaps even 30% are asymptomatic. So you get no symptoms, but you can pass it on. So it's essentially this problem that 20%, in some countries seems to be a bit less, maybe 15, 12% of those who are infected or detected with infection come down with quite severe ailments and have to be hospitalized. Hospitalization, basically what happens is you first get, let's say you get a bad cough, or perhaps if you got symptomatic, then you get a dry cough, you get high fever, you get perhaps headache, extreme weakness in the body, and a general feeling of malaise, illness, weakness, sickness. And then it goes away after about 2 days, and then it returns in some cases after about 5 or 6 days. And when it returns ferociously. And this is the general path of the ailment. And it means your lungs are attacked. You generally get one of two main problems. One is you get pneumonia in both lungs, and you're unable to get enough air. And then obviously you need ventilation, or you need oxygen then. If the ventilation is not available in the hospitals, because you need IC units with ventilators and you need oxygen supply. If the ventilators are not available in the hospitals, then the number of deaths goes up and up and up. And if you get a large number of people with the needing hospitalization, needing ventilation, needing oxygen supplies, then it'll destroy any health service in the world. So that's the reason why they talk about controlling the curve and all the rest of it. That's why you have to contain, because the death rate, well, there are various estimates about the death rate. It's partly dependent upon level of development of the health service, But in general, in China, they've got quite a good record now. You know, you're talking about 3%. In some cases, you might have, in a very advanced country, you might have perhaps 0.5%. So that wouldn't be so bad, but it depends on
of the people that are dying. Not to say
the
that
people who are infected will die.
But of the people that are dying, I'm hearing that it's like I said, vulnerable people that are already vulnerable, like elderly and people with serious immune health problems already.
Most of the people who have died, for example, in Italy, are people in a vulnerable category with 1, 2, or 3 other ailments. Having said that, there are, you know, for example, the whistleblower doctor who died, there was nothing wrong with him. And he died because what the other symptom, other than the pneumonia, is because it's a virus that the body doesn't know how to fight. It's never been detected before by the body, unlike other, like colds and flus. You'll have had some variant of it in your lifetime. Yeah, I mean, this is why, for example, when Westerners arrived in North America or in South America, the natives had never encountered these diseases that we had immunity to. And so when we spread the diseases, huge numbers, millions of people died in these countries. And so that is why it's essential that's why we need to do the things that are, or why the whole issues are being discussed now about quarantine, all the rest of it, because we don't have the immunity. And so what happens is, in many of the healthy patients, the immune system of the body overreacts. And when it overreacts, it tries to fight something it doesn't know how to fight. And then that kills you. So the circulation system breaks down in those people. Now, but it is true, like you say, that to date, the majority of people, the age grouping tends to be, you know, the higher spectrum. So 60, 70, 80 years of age are much more likely. 80, a high morbidity rate, 15% or so amongst those who get it. Now, but what does that mean? You've got a previous ailment. My brother's had a heart attack. My mother's had a stroke. You know, I've had pneumonia before and nearly died from pneumonia. So, you know, it's not like, you know, it's only if you're completely healthy that you think, oh, right, yeah, well, that doesn't bother me, you know. But otherwise, once you start thinking about your environment, your friends, your family, your neighbors, and so on, this is the issue. And of course, then you have, you know, if you've got the ailment, even if it's just mild, you think, oh, so what? And you're going into a supermarket now, and supermarkets are dangerous now, to be honest with you. I'd say that straight. Supermarkets are dangerous. Buses have been dangerous for weeks. Tubes have been dangerous for weeks. Workplaces have been dangerous for weeks. And I said this at Speaker's Corner a few weeks ago. A lot of people think I was lunatic. But actually, if you look at the data now, well, the data, these ridiculous figures the government keeps coming out with, one day they turn around and say, we're testing and we've checked. Next day they say, we're not testing anymore. They say the figures are officially, what is it? I don't know what the figure is today, 2,500 or something like that. And the next minute, and on Monday, I think it was, of this week, they were saying, Witty, this sort of creature from the unknown, he came on telly and he said at the press conference with Boris Johnson, he said 10,000 people are infected. And a couple of days later, he said 50,000 are infected. So what on earth are they playing at? That they don't even have a clue on how many affected. And at the same time, for the best part of 2 or 3 weeks, they were pursuing this insane strategy of letting everybody catch the disease in the idea that that will create immunity within the population and we could isolate certain sections. So it was almost like, you know, they had this plan. Sorry, just one second. They had this plan, for example, to let the summer rip, you know, let's get to the summer. Once the summer rips, all the young people can go and get infected because only a tiny number of them will come down ill. And then we could control the dissemination into the older generation, which is the same type. And obviously, any health strategy in these circumstances has a certain amount of cynicism to it. I mean, there's no doubt about it. You're talking about, you know, the ability to control the number of deaths that happen. On the other side, really, the Chinese have shown, and the South Koreans, to be fair, and the Taiwanese, and the Hong Kongers, actually, and the Singaporeans, that you can contain this provided you test enough people and you get ahead of the curve.
So yeah, I was going to ask you how you felt the government is have been dealing with it, and if you felt that they had any type of action plan, or if it's just like as things develop, they're just dealing with it. However, however they feel is best to at the time. But do you feel like they've been transparent with the general public?
No, they've been pulling a con job on everybody, a complete con job. The start of the con job is to say it's all Dominic Cummings. It's Cummings behind it all. He's some sort of, I don't know, some sort of megalomaniac. It's really quite grim. He's got his data crunch.
What's the motive though? Conning us for what?
Well,
for whose benefit?
Prestige, authority, power. These are important factors when you come to governments. And the idea was that, they've got, the ridiculous thing is that they say, oh, this is the scientists are telling us, and we're doing a science-driven solution. It's nothing to do with science. And they're presenting it as if it's scientific, whereas actually it's behavioral science, which is not science at all. Behavioral science is marketing. That's all it is. It's methods of marketing. And so there's this organization that was set up, that was taken into government and influenced the government under David Cameron, and it was called the nudge. Basically, nudge, we nudge you into doing something. And so this is how they came up with this mad idea that Boris Johnson would come on telly and say, well, there's nothing to worry about. Just wash your hands. We're not like the Chinese. You just wash your hands, sing happy birthday, and everything will be fine. The problem was his specific advice for the last 2 weeks. And the point is the curve is very rapid. It's exponential. So if you start out like 1, 2, 4, 6, the rate of increase at the moment in Europe is 33% a day. So it only takes you a few days and you're in thousands, and then tens and hundreds of thousands. Now we are now way above the numbers in London, for example, than when Wuhan shut down and Hubei shut down. We're way above those numbers. And so, expect carnage, because there will be carnage. Now, the way out of it is mass testing. Now they're now doing this. You see, what's happened is Cummings and his gang were able to hold the line until beginning of this week.
See, when you say shutdown, China shutdown, explain exactly what that entailed. Because I remember seeing reports about clouds of smoke coming from them allegedly incinerating people that have died and all of these things. I don't know if you're advocating for things like that as well. I think you explain the details when
it comes to China, any story is good enough. So the problem at the moment is that there are many people who you would think are perfectly rational and sane. You see, disease is a very peculiar thing. Quarantine's a very peculiar thing. Virus is a very peculiar thing. The unseen enemy. Is it just an invention? Is it biological weapon? Is it made by the Americans? Is it made? These ideas, they have a global sense, and then they have an individual sense. And this individual sense goes back to the most primeval instincts of man. What is your friend? What is your enemy? What is safe? What is dangerous? That has become the everyday life of humanity at the moment. And this is the most peculiar social phenomena associated with what's happening. So the Chinese took actions which, within the context of their level of development of their economy, of the movement of the people as well. So you have to remember, it's quite a unique moment when Wuhan was shut down. It is because at that time, there's what they call the Chinese New Year, the Spring Festival. It begins on the 10th of January, or it began on the 10th of January, And it's on the 23rd of January, they closed down Wuhan. 5 million people had left Wuhan as part of this mass migration that happens at the time of Chinese New Year. 280 million people, more, the biggest migration in the whole of the world, move at that time. And so that's why the clampdown was necessary in a context of a country, you know, whose population is 4 times or 3 times as large as Europe, and able to move around the country and moving at that moment. And so unless they had some means of controlling or checking who was ill and who was not ill, the whole thing would have blown up to millions and millions of deaths. And then there would have been an upheaval. And then there would have been a counter-revolution or the overthrow of the Communist Party and, you know, the American army going in as defenders of the people and imposing a quarantine, funny enough. There was an interesting article I read yesterday by the, what was it called? So if I got it here. It's not here. By one of the military academies in the United States in 2013, and it was about Spanish flu. And they said, well, there were studies in different countries where they had got one part of the country they quarantined, another part of the country they didn't, and those quarantined had no lost life, and those not quarantined 30-40% death rate. And so this major in the American army, he says, well, we should be able, this was a theoretical master's thesis he was making for the US Army, and he said, we should be able to, this was under George Bush, we should be able to intervene in a country to impose a quarantine where a virus is prevalent. So in other words, using that type of argument, it would have been justifiable for the Chinese to invade Britain and the United States for not doing anything about the spread of the virus. And I think they were just complacent, you know, the British and the Americans, they were just complacent. And they thought, oh, it's just a Chinese thing, the same type of stupidity. Oh, it's a Chinese thing. It'll die out there.
About the virus itself and the origins of it. I don't know if you watched that video with Pavlov and his Chinese friend. She explained, well, her theory was that, one of her theories was that the Chinese Communist Party invented the virus to quell the protests that was happening at the time. I don't know if you've given any thought to that, or if you've heard anything like that.
I mean, the only major protests in China at that time were
in Hong Kong. In Hong Kong.
And the point I made about the Hong Kong thing, I've already said. You know, the Hong Kong movement was already losing steam, but it was a very dangerous movement from the point of view of China and probably from the point of view of the world. And the Americans had already agreed to all sorts of legislation saying that basically the human rights in Hong Kong have to be protected, and the Americans would basically defend and protect them. As it happened, when the virus broke out, I mean, how on earth was this beneficial to the Communist Party at that time? As it turns out, because, as was unexpected, the mass of people in China collaborated and participated willingly with the measures that were taken. And the consequence of that is, actually, the Communist Party has been forced to the left as a consequence of what has happened. So, for example, I saw on YouTube this afternoon that the doctors and medics, 40,000 of whom who flew into Wuhan to save Wuhan and save Hubei and to control the spread of the virus and to reach what they've got now, 0 new cases inside China, only cases coming from outside. And that's an extraordinary achievement. And, you know, you look at the government figures, the government yesterday in Britain's a tiny country, 1/10 of the size of China. And yet they're talking about minimal 20,000 dead. And in China, the total dead is less than Italy now. Italy overtook China today. So 3,000 something dead in China. And they're talking about 20,000 in the UK. Well, what sort of government is that? You know, 3,000 out of 1,400 million, okay, you know, it's tolerable. 20,000 in the UK in 2 months, or 250,000 as they were expecting only on Sunday, according to their calculations. You know, who are these people? You know, where do they get these ideas from that they can do this sort of stuff to people? What are we, guinea pigs? So the issue is this, as far as the sort of theories of, you know, biological warfare. Look, even if it came out of a laboratory, either from America or from China, it doesn't make any difference. It's a virus, and the effect is the same. Now, viruses have always developed as a called this type of virus has developed from what they call zoonotic transmission. So in other words, it comes from an animal to a human being. It looks like the transmission rate or transmission path is bat to something like a pangolin, like an anteater, and then to a human. Now, many people turn around and say, I mean, I'm half Chinese. Many people turn around and say, you know, Chinese. I've seen it loads, even on left-wing sites, people turning around and saying, the Chinese eat bats. The Chinese have all these strange habits. They eat wildlife and all this sort of thing. Look, China is a 5,000-year-old civilization. It was based in agriculture for the majority of that civilization. And that agriculture was closely connected to the wilds, to the forests, to the, you know, natural environment in which wildlife lived. And human beings in China have always eaten a vast amount of different wildlife and animals that perhaps in the West we don't. But it didn't stop mad cow disease from developing in Britain. It doesn't stop us from having, what's this other one, foot and mouth disease every few years. So, you know, put it in context. And I remember in 1991, I lived in China, and I went to Guangzhou, which is Canton, opposite Hong Kong. And at that time, when I walked down the street from my hotel, every restaurant had anteaters for sale. They had, you know, everything from insects. It was like a zoo. The marketplace was like a zoo. And that was closed down in the 1990s in the major cities. But they're always in. This is a country of a quarter of the world. So because of that, there are vast differences in different locations. You know, it's not like Xi Jinping in Beijing can say, stop all markets for example, you know, eating pangolins, and that everyone will do it. You know, you've got villages in the most remotest places, in mountaintops, and, you know, and so it's the connection between this rural world, which has been not the same for thousands of years, but quite similar for thousands of years, and the urban world. And it's that interconnection. Then the other side that comes into it is that many of the very wealthiest Chinese have a penchant for the bizarre and the peculiar, just the same as in Britain. You know, paedophile rings proliferate amongst many of the wealthiest elites, or you know, there are people in Europe who will eat other human beings. You know, they kill someone, eat them. You know, sometimes to discover what it tastes like. You know, there are bizarre phenomena in the world, and so, you know, at some stage or other, these type of diseases will develop. You know, obviously, it's not helped by having wildlife markets, but to blame the Chinese for doing this is ridiculous. Most Chinese, urban Chinese nowadays, you know, they eat McDonald's and Kentucky. You know,
what do you think should be done now then in this country?
In this country,
yeah.
Well, the problem is, well, firstly, they were too late. So that's one argument, very clear, and it was too late because they had conflicting arguments being presented. The one argument that was dominant was the idea, let everyone become ill. This type of mad idea that Dominic Cummings was advocating. I think he'll probably be sacked quite soon.
Just a quick one. People in the comment section, I've seen a few questions asking about your connections to the Chinese government.
I write for a Chinese website. I have done since 2009.
Yeah, I know you don't make no secret about your your position and all of these things. So yeah.
It's published on the internet. It's no secret, you know.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
But I have no, you know, I'm not told by them what's. In fact, the peculiar thing is, I wrote an article. You can look on Facebook. I wrote an article for the Chinese press exposing what the British government was doing, and they didn't want to publish it in China because they didn't want to upset the British. You know, so it's not like the Chinese are trying to smash the British or something like that or undermine them. You know, it's just, I mean, my knowledge of China, I try to bring to bear on this because it relates to because it's not a medical question in and of its own. It's a social question. What type of social system do we have? How does that function? That's what's being tested. And of course, the crisis of capitalism that was already coming, the bizarre thing is, the crisis of capitalism was already on our doorstep before the COVID-19 virus spread around the world, has been exacerbated. And it was almost comical yesterday to see the Chancellor, the British Chancellor, I can't remember his name, the new Rajiv or something, I can't remember his name. But anyway, the new Chancellor, he declared he's going to spend 250,000 million pounds. In other words, as much and more than Communist Corbyn was about to do a couple of months ago. That's what they're proposing now. And so first thing I'll say to all the viewers, and I'm sure people will recognize this as a useful piece of advice, cancel your direct debit for paying rent. Cancel it. The mortgages have been cancelled for 3 months. Why the hell should you be paying rent when you've got no income for 3 months? Possibly 3 months, you'll have no proper income. So cancel your direct debits, cancel your direct debit for electricity, cancel for gas, cancel for rent. And in France, for example, yesterday they announced no rent, no electricity, no bills for a month to start with. So okay, cancel it now.
What France announced that when? Yesterday?
The French announced today that they would be doing this.
Yeah.
But yesterday the Chancellor said he was going to spend 250 billion. If you've got a limited company now, they're going to be giving away grants next Monday of £20,000 each. That's what they were saying. You just go to them and give us 20 grand. They're going to give them to them. So, but what about the workers? What about the poor? What about the self-employed? You know, this is like they're saying, oh, we've looked after business. Business is getting billions thrown their way. All these parasitic companies, you know, they're going to get billions thrown at them. And, but the ordinary people are being told, you know, we must like behave ourselves, you know.
So what do you reckon? What do you reckon?
I mean, I think the government will be forced. I mean, you know, will be forced to do what I've just said. They will. Where
would the pressure be coming from for them to do that though?
Because you see, a war is the mother of revolution, and this is like a war. And so when you say that we're in a national crisis, we're all in it together. Right?
Coming in France, there's been those protests, those yellow vest protests. They're still going on now, right?
Well,
so the French government's already looking out for the people.
There was a protest the other day. The point is that France, you have this enormous militancy that's always like waiting just beneath the surface. And when you bring people together in a collective struggle of one form or another, whether it be a war, whether it be a massive, let's say earthquake or something like that, where everybody's forced to combine together, then all the contradictions in society come to a head and find expression. Why have they got that and we haven't? Why have they got, big house where they can quarantine and we haven't? That's not how people start off, but that's how the consequence of that war or that crisis appears afterwards. And because of that, I mean, these people aren't fools. Because of that, they are having to take now what effectively, well, I mean, what we're seeing at the moment is capitalist communism. The government is spending billions and billions in a way they've never done before in peacetime, to be honest with you, even in wartime, they're a bit slow in what they do normally. But anyway, when they need to mobilize resources, then they mobilize resources. So now they're giving the money to the capitalists, to big business, but also they will be forced to give money to the workers and the rest of the population as well. And I'm pretty sure they will do. The point is whatever we demand now will help to shape that process. And so if people take action themselves, and that's important to do, and that means you stop paying your rent, you stop paying your bills, and then we want maybe
If
£1,000
everybody's
per person on top per month.
if everybody's too cautious to congregate in large numbers to organize, who's going to be doing the organizing?
I remember a friend of mine. He was in solitary confinement in South Africa, and when he was in solitary confinement, you make a connection through that silence to the outside world. And his main focus for many years was trying to get into the brain of his prison guards. And eventually his prison guards began to, he used to say to them, I am here all the time because of my political crime. You are also here. Why are you here? So in the end, the prison guard joined the mindset of the prisoner. And if you look at what happened in Italy and in Spain in the last few days, and even in France, I saw pictures this evening. Once people are in this situation, there will be a sense of solidarity emerge. I spoke to a friend of mine, I live in Ladbroke Grove. I spoke to a friend of mine a couple of days ago who does music for a living. I said, well, look, let's start a carnival out the window. So we don't have to be on the street to do a carnival around here. We can do a carnival out the window, and it will come. In a few weeks' time, there'll be a solidarity from wall to wall, from window to window, linking us together in a way we've not been linked together in our living memories.
So when I'm saying that everybody does go along with the idea of boycotting making any payments for rent and all of these things, what do you feel, how would that impact the economy and government in general and the society in general?
It won't have any impact on the economy. The economy is governed by investment. So a business person, a capitalist economy works like this. I've got some money. I want to make more money. How do you make more money? You make things that you can sell on the marketplace, either real commodity, tangible or intangible things. So, whether it be a YouTube video or a motor car, and you get more money from what you from after the sales than what you had in the first place. That extra money comes from the work that the workers do. The workers are the goose that lay the golden egg. So without them, you don't have anything. That's why they are dependent upon us. They're totally and absolutely dependent upon us. You see, this is the peculiar thing.
When you say they, who's they?
The ruling class, the landlords, the bankers, and the capitalists.
Yeah.
The owners
isn't it them who create the systems that we work in though, as the workforce?
Well, it's actually a dual thing. You see, if you go to work for somebody, there's a symbiotic relationship between you in this sense, but it's not a mutually beneficial relationship.
I would agree, but I would say the initialization of that process doesn't come from the worker to the bosses. I would say the blueprint is by the bosses. So the incentive and all these things. That's why the workers, there's a long line of people who's willing to replace you if you don't go to work.
That's true. In normal circumstances, the balance of power is 100% in favor or overwhelmingly in favor of capital. So you can't moan too much or you get fired. Basically, simple as that. But in circumstances like now, the balance of forces are completely changed. So Marx used to say, or Engels used to say, understanding our society starts from the simple fact that if everyone stops working for a period of 5 or 6 or 10 days or a week, nothing functions in society. It's all dependent upon the workers. And so most of the time, people are completely unaware of this because they're on the, they're in the, what do you call it? The spinning wheel that you have your hamster wheel going round in, you're in that wheel. So you don't step back and observe it from the outside. And so a Marxist or a socialist who says that type of thing, people say, oh, you're talking shit, you utopian, whatever. Yeah, okay, fine. But the reality of that is going to be revealed during the next few months, that everything is dependent upon medical staff, delivery staff, production staff, toilet paper makers,
And how do you think that realization in the minds of the masses of people, once they get that, will influence the direction of the future, just in
Well, they don't.
general?
You see, the big joke about it is that people think that China is some totalitarian dictatorship that mobilized its people, by some sort of police state. Nobody in China is scared of the police. Some people are scared of the political police, but nobody's scared of the police. Unlike here, a policeman stops you on the street, you might be grudging, or even the toughest kid will be grudging but annoyed and also a little bit bothered about what they might do to them. In China, nobody's like that. And so what has happened in China is that the Communist Party has been forced to rely upon the masses, and because of that, the masses have suddenly gained power. They haven't gained complete power, but they've gained an enormous amount of power, prestige, and authority within society. Now, the same thing will happen here. The same thing will happen here. And that's why suddenly, and he's got no reason to do this, suddenly Boris Johnson's being very contrite and polite with Jeremy Corbyn, asking him to help out, because otherwise he knows that when war comes to an end, when this war comes to an end and the battle's not even, the first battle hasn't even been fought yet, and all the preparations for the war have been disastrous. So when the battle actually happens and, thousands die or whatever, it's not necessarily going to happen. The disease can disappear. That's one option. SARS did. Or testing can be put in place quickly enough. These are two options. Or the quarantine might work, but I don't think it will work as well as it did in China. But I remember reading Winston Churchill's diaries from the end of the Second World War, and there was an election just before the war ended in Britain. And when that election happened, everyone was predicting a landslide victory for Winston Churchill. But he writes that early in the morning he was awoken by a very sharp pain in his body, and he woke up and he found the news: complete landslide for Labour. So obviously we're not in an electoral cycle here, but the process is the same. The government is introducing, as I said, communistic capitalist measures. So in other words, there's elements of communism in the idea we're going to provide everyone with what they need. They haven't said that yet, but I think that's what they're going to do. If they don't, all hell will break loose, And at the same time, giving unlimited amounts of funds to capital. So you're laying the fact, and then everyone's going to ask afterwards, well, why did they get that and we got this? And why did they, it's a battle over, it's like a reset button that's been pressed on society. And afterwards, the battle will be who gets what. And that battle will not be predetermined by the historical passivity of the masses. It will be determined by what happens now. And many of the people who are screaming and shouting, they will be, people, remember the whole divide. It's like, did you see the cartoon? A really good cartoon, two old people sitting in front of a telly, and there's coronavirus on telly, and then they got newspapers piled up, coronavirus this, and they say, God, I miss Brexit, like that. And all that Brexit argument, the years of bullshit, everyone talking out their backsides against and fighting each other about the most minuity issues about the European Union, that seems like a distant past now. And we've entered a completely new era in the world, and it's an era which I think will be an era of worldwide revolution and also worldwide reaction. One of the scary, obviously, I tend to be an optimist, but one of the scary aspects about what's happening is this: it's the insipid psychological poison that is associated with this idea of virus, human, enemy, keep away. And that it can provoke the most bizarre forms of consciousness. I remember when the HIV virus first began, when AIDS first began. And before that time, pretty much nobody used contraception when they had sex. And, it was quite open time. You could just, have sex with. And suddenly everyone was paranoid, and the news was out there that this virus was there and nobody knew how you got it. And so everyone was like, can I touch that cup? Oh, what have I done? It was like that. Can I pick up that from some, and there's that going around as well. Now that is poisonous as well. There's no doubt about that. And manifestation of that is the fact in England and Australia, people are queuing for toilet rolls and fighting over them. In America, they're queuing up for guns, you know. And so there will be a dual, you know, a polarization, a sharp polarization. And also the most bizarre phenomena will also happen. I mean, I saw a Hindu event in India a few days ago. I mean, I'm looking around the world at the moment at different countries, how they're reacting to this. And I saw an event at a Hindu event in India where they were all drinking cow's pee because they think it's got some protective properties. And it might have a bit of ammonia in it, but it's not going to cure you prevent you from getting a respiratory infection from coronavirus. Having said that, it almost certainly is true, because viruses don't survive, or at least existing viruses we know about, don't survive well in warmer climates. So it probably is true that in warmer areas of the world, like India, people are less likely to get it. Although, for example, there was a big event in Bangladesh a couple of days ago, a religious event, Muslim religious event, and also another one in Kuala Lumpur. And the cases rose in Kuala Lumpur quite significantly. But so you could have too much proximity in a hot environment, which could, for example, spread the virus at a close enough containment or close enough connection for other people to get it and spread it around. Generally, it's like this. If I cough like this and it goes into the air, in an open air environment and in a hot environment, it's going to live less time. In, for example, the tube station, if I go into a tube train and I cough on the tube train, it can hang in the air for maybe 20 minutes and pass right through the carriage. And so this is why you should wear a mask. You know, the idea that one is because it prevents you from coughing on everybody, because no one knows who's got it. You don't necessarily know you've got it yourself, and therefore you can give it to other people. So it's politeness for your part towards other people, not to give it to them. And also it does offer some protection against receiving, and it stops you touching your nose and your face, which is, you know, this mad idea the government has got that you can like convince people to change 200 million years of biological behavior, which is,
you saying that stop touching it is involuntary, in it. The amount of times you touch your face a day,
you know, fetuses do it, and all our mammalian ancestors do it. So how are you going to stop doing it? Stupid. And this is the most. This is like these. This is where the Etonian comes in, the sort of middle class, upper middle class. Oh, the working class haven't got good manners. You know what I mean? Hold your fork properly. You know, all that crap that sort of strata are educated in and think makes them superior to others. Now they're trying to impose on the population, you know, through this nudge everyone to stop touching their face. And of course, it's a disaster, because what's happened is in these 2 weeks since they ran that campaign, wash your face, don't touch your face, wash your hands, don't touch your face. In those 2 weeks, tens of thousands, and God forbid, hundreds of thousands have been infected as a consequence of that policy. And that's an outrage, you know.
Well, boy,
we've done an hour.
We're on a 9 o'clock mark.
Yeah, I think that's enough for now, isn't it? No, anybody else want to ask any questions that you know that they're asking or something like that? And then I'm happy to reply.
Let's have a quick look before we
There was just at one point there was other than the sort of biological weapons theories and all this sort of thing that are circulating as conspiracy theory. There was also a video produced by Dr. Wolfgang Wodarg, I believe his name is Wodarg, and he was he's a lung expert, and he's an expert in virology. He used to be on committees and commissions and so on. And there is a debate in Germany. He is on the outside element of that debate, so the more sort of wild side. And he's basically arguing, well, if you test, there was a study in Glasgow, basically, 2003, 2013. If you test people, you will find about 5 to 15% of the population at any time will have some type of, or during the winter flu, will have some type of coronavirus. There are 4 different coronaviruses that they probably would have. Now, he was therefore arguing that really all we've done is turned our eye on something that was already there. The problem with that argument is there are unique characteristics to this disease. And so it doesn't seem viable to argue that it's not a new disease. And he was basically arguing that the testing for the preparation of the testing kits that came out of a German study carried out at the Charité University by a guy called Drosten. He does a daily podcast basically on German Norddeutsche Rundfunk, so NDR, German radio television. And he made the first viable testing kit. But that test does distinguish between the 4 previous coronaviruses, and it will only show a false positive for a couple of, let me just see what my notes are, for a couple of different possible other ailments, which is like a camel flu and a flu that comes in cows. And it will also distinguish, and also a bat virus. So it showed, sorry. The test that they have got will show positive for a bat virus, for SARS-1, and also for virus in cows and ones in camels. So those are the areas where you could have a crossover between what this virus discovers, but it does clearly have distinct characteristics to the ailment. One is that the virus spreads very rapidly brings in large numbers of people into hospital, who need ventilation. And 2 is the characteristics, the pneumonia characteristics, and the excess immune reaction leading to breakdown of the circulation system. So, I think the arguments that it is actually a real virus, distinct from others, is correct. But that is a debate. That's probably, in my view, the most coherent argument of some sort of conspiracy. But he's basically, it's not conspiracy. He's saying it's just sort of exaggeration.
Cool. Cool. Because we're going to wrap up still. There's a few questions that I've seen in there. We start from the first one that I noticed. It's on the screen. Can you see the screen? This is Haiku. What would you suggest to keep our mental health in? That's a really good question.
That's a really good question, and I think, it is perfectly true that if it were just a case of even a few thousand deaths, like in Italy, and a short period when you'd overcome it, we could tolerate it. But if it goes on and on and on, obviously the consequences for mental health and all the associated sociological problems associated with that, people beating each other up and fighting each other at home, it's like Christmas time multiplied by 10, right? Christmas time, highest number of suicides, highest numbers of hatred, and all that. Having said that, the other day, let me give you an example of what I experienced. It's only a personal experience, but I think it indicates something, and I think you might be able to see it yourselves. I went down to visit my mum. She's in New Malden, so we went down by the river, and there's a place in Ham where you got a German shop, and she's German, so we went in this little German shop. It's like a small little deli, small little shop. But unfortunately, all these other people came in there at the same time, and I put on a mask. I told my mum put on a mask. It was only a small little shop, and suddenly there were all these people heaving in there. And I opened the door of the place. I moved my mum outside. I said to this people, what are you doing? None of you got a mask on. All of you running around touching everything, breathing on everything, in an enclosed environment. It's just horrible, And then they looked at me like I was mad. And then,
that's how Pavlov was mocking the thing still when you were trying to do your presentation and speak.
Well, that's right. And then I went down to the river. We walked by the river for a while, and the people walked past, and they were politely keeping a fair distance. Nobody with masks either. But anyway, you don't really need the mask on the outside. Although one instance where I was looking at that is some people would come past jogging, and someone who's jogging so all that breathing out, if you catch it at the wrong moment when they come past you, you could get infected from that. So therefore, people should just be polite about these things. But what was noticeable was this. Sorry, cut a long story short. Was when people walk past us, and we've been walking in that place by the river many, many times. When people walk past, many people went like this, hello, like that. It's very English, but there was a sense of a collectivity again. You're a human being, I'm a human being. Let's celebrate the fact we're alive. And I think it's important to, in our homes, if we're isolated in homes, to extend our connections, rebuild the connections that we've lost with people. You know, I'm sure all of you now, you would have had loved ones, past lovers, past friends, suddenly getting in contact now. Like, we can retie those knots through this, and we can also retie the community knots through this by making a little bit of effort to make sure that those who are most vulnerable in your environment, that you've seen somewhere on the street, when you notice some old people wandering on the street and this sort of thing, you know, suddenly you're realizing this community exists around you, and you're part of it, and they're part of it, and you can't just let them, you know, fall by the wayside and drop down dead, or, you know, stuck in utter loneliness.
All right.
And so that's our task, basically, in that way, to protect our mental health. I mean, you know,
Yo.
you're right to ask that question. It's a giant question. It's one of the biggest questions of our time.
You gotta try to be rapid with the questions as much as you can still, because
sorry, yeah, okay,
yeah. I asked that question about 4 hours ago, and there's a million more that's come since we started talking. But yeah, this is the next one on the screen. I don't know if you can make sense of it.
Come back, old normal.
Draconian laws.
I mean, draconian laws are coming. The point is about, you know,
but you're in favor of what I'm suggesting you would call draconian lockdowns. Like
I don't have any problem with the army coming out on the street. I don't have any problem with the police coming out on the street. Don't forget this. A few months ago, you remember last year, Extinction Rebellion put like a couple of thousand people on the street. The whole of London was paralyzed. Why was it paralyzed? Because they took the attitude, well, okay, arrest us all. And they know there's only so many prison spaces. There's only so many courts. And the consequence of that was the entire city of London was paralyzed for days on end, right? So, you know, as soon as the state is forced to show its capacity, it's revealed for what it is, a king with no clothes. They don't have the capacity to enforce draconian laws. Once the people are conscious and aware, there's no power on earth can stop thousands and thousands and millions of people who have changed their mind about the way the world is. The power on earth.
What about automated machines, AI and all of that? They're getting there. They're getting there. That drone strike your clock.
The most peculiar thing about this crisis is the utter incapacity or inaction on the part of Google and Facebook and artificial intelligence experts. And so whilst the possibility for, if you like, the consequence of if there was, if you like, a new balance of forces established after this crisis, and the state is no longer able to use force as it would like to do, that they use drones and robots and all the rest of it. Well, yes, those are real dangers. But, you know, to be honest with you, I'm absolutely astounded at the fact that we haven't got Facebook and Google sort of helping to shape the, you know, the enforcement of quarantine, because you could have a much more subtle quarantine then. You know, if you got Facebook and so on, if we're able to use the resources and the knowledge, artificial intelligence they've got about us, they know more about us than we do. You know, they know more about me than I do. Of course they do. You know, they got all the data there. You know, I think more, but not quite more. But at the same time, in terms of data, yes, my interconnections, my associations, who they are, because they know about them as well. So, you know, it's absolutely astounding that these entities have not done it. They are going to do something. I know George Bush. I know Donald Trump is planning to do something with Google and Facebook, and probably the British government is going to do the same. So wait that for the next couple of weeks, they'll be claiming this dazzling new advance. You know, Facebook and Google are going to help them. You know, but where the fuck were they till now?
All right. Next one on the screen from your body right reaction.
Yeah, we'll never choose communism. Well, it doesn't matter whether you choose communism. Call it, you know, rose by any other name tastes just as sweet. As I said, the British government, a conservative government that declared itself ferociously opposed to Marxism, is carrying out exactly the same monetary policies that they said Jeremy Corbyn was, if he carried out, was communism.
Steve asks, you know, atheist Steve from the park, he asks, how do you hold your fork? When he's doing the Eton, when he was dissing the Eton man then.
Actually, I do hold it downwards, but I don't put it on top.
Let me scroll through and see if you got any more. How much more time you got, IQ?
A few more minutes, eh? Let's go to a 1/2 past, Max. Yeah.
Right. Let me scroll.
There was nothing in the shop today. Nothing. Well,
shop?
not nothing. But like, I went to the shop today and they had.
Was it just a local corner shop?
Beans, one piece of meat and one it was in my Tesco's, and one I got 2 tins of sweet peas. I'm not going out and buying all the time. Fuck that. It's too dangerous. This is actually
everyone's been talking about the empty shops and all that. Every shop that I've gone to, it looks normal to me, man. There's a lot more people buying shit, but in terms of the stock, everything's like fully stocked.
Well, depends where it is. I mean, that was the case here yesterday, but today it was not. Today they were really empty, But I mean, there's always something there to bloody eat, you panic about it. And toilet roll. I was making a video. I didn't publish it today. I thought it's maybe a bit too crude, but for the Speaker's Corner audience, I think you can cope with this. It's like, apparently in Colombia, there was adverts like this, people paying for things with toilet paper, So I was going to make a little video about how you can reduce your consumption by cutting it in 4. Anyway, I thought it was funny.
There's the next question on the screen.
Heike, do you think the spread of COVID in Iran, when they were mourning the Attorney General, was likely killed by the USA? No, I don't think anyone spread. Look, who spread it to America? It is a virus. Viruses spread. I mean, it's true that this is part of the psychological problem that comes from it, is that because we don't even know how it's spread. They're saying we know that it's likely to be spread by touching things, putting it in your mouth, touching, this sort of thing. We know that it's spread respiratory form, but we don't know about this thing, like I said, about someone running past as a jogger, or they did a test. Actually, there was one study in China published this week where because they had a camera on this person who came down with the virus. And they noticed the number of people inside the different transport things, the 2 buses he used, in the different buses he used, where they sat, how close they were they wore masks, and so on. Now, funnily enough, there were a couple of people next to him who didn't wear masks, who did not come down with it. But there were others who were 10 meters away from him on the same bus who came down with it from him. So they were... Tracing is very important for that, to identify how the ailment spreads. And so, that's why, you can't, some people won't get, for whatever reason, some people will not catch it. That's the way the world is.
Next question. Marijuana.
Just a way for the UN to agenda 21 to control the people. You see, were there a universal conspiracy such as Agenda 21, Bilderberg conspiracy, Illuminati, and all this sort of thing, they would operate a lot better than they do. It's astounding sometimes how incompetent the existing rulers of society are. Like I said, Facebook, if they could have done these things, Facebook and Google, they probably will do some of these things, but they're doing it in such a late stage that they lose the prestige. They could have gained the prestige had Facebook said, let's say, beginning of January, end of January. Well, when China locked down, they said, we don't need to lock down. You just need to follow this app on Facebook and you can protect yourself. They could have done it. Did they do it? Did they fuck? So I really don't overestimate the ruling class. They put on a good show occasionally, but don't overestimate them. They have many plans. If you go back through American military documents, master's theses, so they got dozens and dozens of plans that sound clever and coherent and draconian and ferocious and scary. Comes down to it, General, there used to be a poem by Bertolt Brecht. General, you have an aeroplane, but it has one flaw. It needs a pilot. General, you have a tank, but it has one flaw. It needs a driver. But even artificial intelligence still needs a human to control what happens with it, at least with most of it. So, but there is a big question there. That's another slightly different question. The potential of artificial intelligence and drones and this sort of thing is another thing longer term. but I don't think it's correct. And the green movement, the mad thing is, again, the green movement, the Extinction Rebellion Brigade and all this sort of thing, where have they been? You know, they've been totally absent from this issue, totally absent, haven't had a word to say, even though the lockdown in China resulted in the complete collapse of greenhouse emissions, and therefore revealed to the world how, if you really wanted to stop greenhouse emissions, you could. And that the same thing will happen in Europe now and in America, is that the capacity of society to reorganize itself in a way that radically reduces greenhouse emissions will be revealed by this. Now, whether greenhouse emissions cause warming is another question, but
that's a good point. So you might hear some of them come down to the park. Who's the one who comes down to the park? T.O. Yeah, you might advocate for this lockdown thing on behalf, like with the intention of lowering the greenhouse human emissions and all of these things.
I mean, you know, that's not what happened, though, is it? I mean, you know, the Greens have been completely absent. There has been a giant Keynesian expansion program, which is, like I said, is this capitalist communism they're coming out with. But that's actually, the virus is only a part of this. The virus, you know, the crisis was already there. They were already planning to do a massive expansion program. They originally intended this massive expansion program to be based around the Green New Deal. The European Union had $1 trillion set aside. You know, they hoped that Bernie Sanders' influence would push for this, or that Biden might push for this, you know, that there would be some massive expansion in climate change investments. Well, you know, now it's no longer on the cards. You know, they're subsidizing, they're giving all the money to the businesses to, you know, to keep them afloat.
All right. Next question from my brother Witness. Said, good evening. Could you please ask Haiku, what does he think the government might do to homeless people? Will they be harassed by the state?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I was thinking today, actually, earlier on, before we arranged this, to go out and go to central London and look around and see whether the homeless people are still lying all over the street. My guess is they are, because I don't think actually anything's been done. But, you know, what we need to do is to identify the empty buildings, seize the empty buildings, report the empty buildings on Facebook and so on. And if you've got some mates who know how to get into a building, break into the buildings and open the buildings for the homeless people, because there's enough empty buildings in London to house them without any problem. You know, you could probably 3 or 4 major large buildings and you could house all the people there, and then let the council go in and try and sort out making sure there's certain distance between the people. You know, you should have individual flats ideally, but at least have large distances between them so they can have a reasonable existence. You know, it may actually be the means of overcoming the homelessness problem, because there's enough empty buildings, and it's time to seize them as a public health issue. Is that it? Are we done for the now, or something? There's a couple of, I should get my glasses, so I just don't know where they are. Perennial problem of people are wearing glasses. Can't see. Anyway, I'll try and peek in. What does it say? I think this could lead to a world war. Big question. I'll have a think about that. I mean, I don't think so, but certainly we're ratcheting up the tension, and we're making. It will foster paranoia, and paranoia is a dangerous thing. So I'll hold back on that. I'll do some studies, and we'll come back to this theme: war and the virus and nationalism and racism, and, you know, all these related issues that are connected in. When I've done a bit of reading about it, I'm trying to catch up with those sort of themes, and they are big, long-standing historical themes. And so I won't minimize I won't try to answer you without being adequately informed on that, because I think that is a very big question, and it's a very relevant question, but I can't really offer enough depth now to make it worthwhile answering. And on that note, I think that's enough, isn't it? We've got another one? No.
Well, someone else, if you've got a YouTube channel, leave a comment from your YouTube page in it so people can.
Yeah, well, I've been relying upon you for a while, but I'm going to start doing stuff on my YouTube channel as well. It's just Haikoku, basically. Yeah.
His name. Type in his name, Haikoku.
Most of my stuff is on content over everything. You know.
Yeah, he's got a playlist on his COE. All of the videos that he's on.
I actually cut off the internet a little while ago. I cut off Facebook and all that a while ago. And talking about what someone was saying earlier on about mental sanity, I really thought that cutting off the internet, cutting off Facebook helped my mental sanity, you know. So I only came back on because of this, really.
Okay.
All right. Thanks very much, Leon. Thanks very much.
No problem, man. It was a pleasure to host, man.
Thanks for everybody. Thanks for your great questions, and do stay safe and stop paying your rent.
All right, then. There we have it. None like Haiku Crew. Thanks for coming through.
Cheers.
Peace. That's a wrap. Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Haiku's gone. I'm going to close down the show. Respect everyone for coming on. Big up Haiku every time for coming on. You get me? Yeah, spontaneous one, but a well-needed one in this time. You get me? Coronavirus. Corona Motorola holder. Play it, body, pack over his shoulder. But yeah, we out, man. So we check your Twitter. I warned you. My thing. I'm gonna check it still, pleb. Enforcement. Peace to my brother Shakara. See man in the comments. Yeah, we out, man. Peace, peace, peace. So wrap.